Hey everyone, we're back with 1984. We're in the second half of chapter 8. For me, that's page 82. Okay. A twinge of fear went through him. It had been a sufficiently rash act to buy the book in the beginning, and he had sworn never to come near the place again. So Winston is standing outside the junk shop. This is after he talked to the prole in the bar and got no useful information out of him. And yet the instant that he allowed his thoughts to wander, his feet had brought him back here of their own accord. It was precisely against suicidal impulses of this kind that he had hoped to guard himself by opening the diary. At the same time, he noticed that although it was nearly 21 hours, the shop was still open. With the feeling that he would be less conspicuous inside than hanging about on the pavement, he stepped through the doorway. If questioned, he could plausibly say that he was trying to buy razor blades. And if you remember from the summary that I gave you, razor blades at this point in time are hard to come by. So it makes sense that he would go to the junk shop to try to find the razor blades. The proprietor had just lighted a hanging oil lamp, which gave off an unclean but friendly smell. He was a man of perhaps 60, frail and bowed, with a long, benevolent nose and mild eyes distorted by thick spectacles. His hair was almost white, but his eyebrows were bushy and still black. His spectacles, his gentle, fussy movements, and the fact that he was wearing an aged jacket of black velvet gave him a vague air of intellectuality, as though he had been some kind of literary man, or perhaps a musician. His voice was soft as though faded, and his accent less debased than that of the majority of proles. And so what Winston is saying is that this man, he's very smart. He comes off as smart and kind, and he doesn't have an accent like most proles do. He doesn't sound like he's unintelligent, or he sounds like he could almost be a party member. "I recognized you on the pavement," he said immediately. "You're the gentleman that bought the Young Lady's Keepsake album. That was a beautiful bit of paper, that was. Cream laid, it used to be called. There's been no paper like that made for, I dare say 50 years. He peered at Winston over the top of his spectacles. "Is there anything special I can do for you? Or did you just want to look around?" "I was passing," said Winston vaguely. "I just looked in. I don't want anything in particular." "It's just as well," said the other, "because I don't suppose I could have satisfied you." He made an unapologetic gesture with his soft-palmed hand. "You see how it is. An empty shop, you might say. Between you and me, the antique trade's just about finished. No demand any longer, and no stock either. Furniture, china, glass, it's all been broken up by degrees. And of course the metal stuff's mostly been melted down. I haven't seen a brass candlestick in years." And so this is because of the war. They're taking apart furniture for wood, for fabric. They're taking apart, they're melting candlesticks for the brass, to make things in the war, stuff like that. They've gotten rid of a lot of the antiques, and I don't know, I guess like the nice things that people used to have. The tiny interior of the shop was in fact uncomfortably full, but there was almost nothing in it of the slightest value. The floor space was very restricted because all around the walls were stacked innumerable dusty picture frames. In the window there were trays of nuts and bolts, worn-out chisels, pen-knives with broken blades, tarnished watches that did not even pretend to be in going order, and other miscellaneous rubbish. So everything left is junk. It's just a whole bunch of picture frames, old nuts and bolts, and like broken knives, things like that. It is an actual junk shop. I think of, occasionally I'll go into a thrift store and nothing that is there that's worth anything, or there's some like creepy stuff in there, like weird dolls and stuff like that. And that's what I think of with this shop. Only on a small table in the corner was there a litter of odds and ends, lacquered snuff boxes, agate brooches, and the like, which looked as though they might include something interesting. As Winston wandered towards the table, his eye was caught by a round, smooth thing that gleamed softly in the lamplight, and he picked it up. It was a heavy lump of glass, curved on one side, flat on the other, making almost a hemisphere. There was a peculiar softness as of rainwater in both the color and the texture of the glass. At the heart of it, magnified by the curved surface, there was a strange pink, convoluted object that recalled a rose or a sea anemone. "What is it?" said Winston, fascinated. "That's coral, that is," said the man. "It must have come from the Indian Ocean. They used to kind of embed it in the glass that wasn't made less than 100 years ago. More, by the look of it." "It's a beautiful thing," said Winston. "It is a beautiful thing," said the other appreciatively. "But there's not many that say so nowadays." He coughed. "Now, if it so happens that you want to buy it, that costs you $4. I can remember when a thing like that would have fetched £8, and £8 was, well, I can't work it out, but it was a lot of money. But who cares about genuine antiques nowadays, even the few that's left?" Winston immediately paid over the $4 and slid the coveted thing into his pocket. What appealed to him about it was not so much its beauty as the air it seemed to possess of belonging to an age quite different from the present one. He likes it because it belongs to the past. It's not something that's made now. They don't have nice things like this anymore. The soft, rainwatery glass was not like any glass that he had ever seen. The thing was doubly attractive because of its apparent uselessness, though he could guess that it must have been intended as a paperweight. So he likes that it's useless, because everything to do with the party has to have a use. There's nothing that you can get that's just frivolous, or just something to have it, or to make your space look beautiful. You don't have any of that kind of stuff anymore. It seems like it's forbidden. Like, Winston could be probably persecuted or arrested for having an item like this, or it would be strongly discouraged to have an item like this paperweight. It was very heavy in his pocket, but unfortunately it did not make much of a bulge. Fortunately, it did not make much of a bulge. It was a queer thing, even a compromising thing, for a party member to have in his possession. Anything old, and for that matter anything beautiful, was always vaguely suspect. The old man had grown noticeably more cheerful after receiving the $4. Winston realized that he would have accepted 3 or even 2. "There's another room upstairs that you might care to take a look at," he said. "There's not much in it, just a few pieces. We'll do with a light if we're going upstairs." He lit another lamp and, with bowed back, led the way slowly up the steep and worn stairs and along a tiny passage into a room which did not give on the street, but looked out on a cobbled yard and a forest of chimney pots. Winston noticed that the furniture was still arranged as though the room was meant to be lived in. There was a strip of carpet on the floor, a picture or two on the walls, and a deep, slatternly armchair drawn up to the fireplace. An old-fashioned glass clock with a 12-hour face was ticking away on the mantelpiece. Under the window and occupying nearly a quarter of the room was an enormous bed with the mattress still on it. "We lived here till my wife died," said the old man half apologetically. "I'm selling the furniture off by little and little. Now there's a beautiful mahogany bed, or at least it would be if you could get the bugs out of it, but I dare say you'd find it a little bit cumbersome." He was holding the lamp high up so as to illuminate the whole room, and in the warm, dim light the place looked curiously inviting. The thought flitted through Winston's mind that it would probably be quite easy to rent the room for a few dollars a week if he dared to take the risk. It was a wild, impossible notion, to be abandoned as soon as thought of, but the room had awakened in him a sort of nostalgia, a sort of ancestral memory. It seemed to him that he knew exactly what it felt like to sit in a room like this, in an armchair beside an open fire, with your feet in the fender and a kettle on the hob, utterly alone, utterly secure, with nobody watching you, no voice pursuing you, no sound except the singing of the kettle and the friendly ticking of the clock. So this is important because Winston thinks about renting this room because it would give him privacy. There's no telescreen. He's not going to be watched constantly by the party. In this room, he could actually be free and be able to do what he wanted. He could write in his diary. He wouldn't have to have his back to the telescreen. He wouldn't have to worry anymore. It would only be if he was caught renting the room. I mean, he would be arrested. But besides that, he's already risking a lot, and so he's thinking about renting the room because a lot of the stuff that he's done already could get him arrested. Having the diary, writing in it, buying the paperweight. There's no telescreen, he could not help murmuring. Ah, said the man. I never had one of those things, too expensive, and I never seemed to feel the need of it, somehow. Now that's a nice gate-leg table in the corner there, though of course you'd have to put new hinges on it if you wanted to use the flaps. There was a small bookcase in the other corner, and Winston had already gravitated towards it. It contained nothing but rubbish. The hunting down and destruction of books had been done with the same thoroughness in the parole quarters as everywhere else. It was very unlikely that there existed anywhere in Oceania a copy of a book printed earlier than 1960. The old man, still carrying the lamp, was standing in front of a picture in rosewood frame which hung on the other side of the fireplace opposite the bed. Now, if you happen to be interested in old prints at all, he began delicately. Winston came across to examine the picture. It was a steel engraving of an oval building with rectangular windows and a small tower in front. There was a railing running round the building, and at the rear end there was what appeared to be a statue. Winston gazed at it for some moments. It seemed vaguely familiar, though he did not remember the statue. So he's looking at a picture of a statue, and he feels like he's seen it before, but he doesn't know for sure. The frame's fixed to the wall, said the old man, but I could unscrew it for you, I dare say. I know that building, said Winston finally. It's a ruin now. It's in the middle of the street outside the Palace of Justice. That's right. Outside the law courts. It was bombed many years ago. It was a church at one time. St. Clement's Danes, its name was. He smiled apologetically, as though conscious of saying something slightly ridiculous, and added, Oranges and lemons, say the bells of St. Clement's. What's that? Said Winston. Oh, oranges and lemons, say the bells of St. Clement's. That was a rhyme we had when I was a little boy. How it goes on I don't remember, but I do know how it ended up. Here comes a candle to light you to bed. Here comes a chopper to chop off your head. It was a kind of dance. They held out their arms for you to pass under, and when they came to here comes a chopper to chop off your head, they brought their arms down and caught you. It was just names of churches. All the London churches were in it. All the principal ones, that is. And so I think that's important. So oranges and lemons, say the bells of St. Clement's, and then here comes a candle to light you to bed, here comes a chopper to chop off your head. So it's very dangerous. It sounds dangerous. Yeah, we'll come back to this rhyme. It keeps coming up throughout all of this whole book. That rhyme continues to come up. Winston wondered vaguely to what century the church belonged. It was always difficult to determine the age of a London building. Anything large and impressive, if it was reasonably new in appearance, was automatically claimed as having been built since the Revolution, while anything that was obviously of earlier date was ascribed to some dim period called the Middle Ages. The centuries of capitalism were held to have produced nothing of any value. One could not learn history from architecture any more than one could learn it from books. Statues, inscriptions, memorial stones, the names of streets, anything that might throw light upon the past had been systematically altered. I never knew it had been a church, he said. There's a lot of them left, really, said the old man, though they've been put to other uses. Now, how did that rhyme go? Ah, I've got it. Oranges and lemons, say the bells of St. Clement's. You owe me 3 farthings, say the bells of St. Martin's. There, now that's as far as I can get. A farthing. That was a small copper coin. Looked something like a cent. Where was St. Martin's? Said Winston. St. Martin's? That's still standing. It's in Victory Square alongside the picture gallery. a building with a kind of triangular porch and pillars in front, and a big flight of steps. Winston knew the place well. It was a museum used for propaganda displays of various kinds, scale models of rocket bombs and floating fortresses, waxwork tableaux, and illustrating enemy atrocities and the like. So it's a museum for propaganda. So anything that the party wants people to see, that would be the propaganda, like the things that the party wants people to believe. So it could be party slogans like freedom is slavery. It could be different things that they've decided, like, okay, this is in our history and this is what we want. It could be pictures of Big Brother. It could be things about Emmanuel Goldstein that show he's a terrible person, stuff like that. St. Martin's is in the fields, it used to be called, supplemented the old man, though I don't recollect any fields anywhere in those parts. Winston did not buy the picture. It would have been an even more incongruous possession than the glass paperweight, and impossible to carry home unless it were taken out of its frame. But he lingered for some minutes more, talking to the old man, whose name he discovered was not Weeks, as one might have gathered from the inscription over the shop front, but Charrington. Mr. Charrington, it seemed, was a widower, aged 63, and had inhabited the shop for 30 years. Though that time he had never been intending to alter the name over the window, but had never quite got to the point of doing it. All the while that they were talking, the half-remembered rhyme kept running through Winston's head. Oranges and lemons, say the bells of St. Clement's. You owe me 3 farthings, say the bells of St. Martin's. It was curious, but when you said it to yourself, you had the illusion of actually hearing bells, the bells of a lost London that still existed somewhere or other, disguised and forgotten. So the rhyme comes from the past, and it makes Winston remember the past in his childhood and a time before the party was in power. From one ghostly steeple after another he seemed to hear them pealing forth. Yet so far as he could remember, he had never in real life heard church bells ringing. So that shows that's another thing, like religion is not a thing that the party does. Like the party in some ways is religion. They've taken over religion, like you believe in Big Brother, you hate Emmanuel Goldstein. And those are the things you believe in. Religion is dangerous because if people can put their faith in religion, then that's faith that's taken away from the party. He got away from Mr. Charrington and went down the stairs alone, so as not to let the old man see him reconnoitering the street before stepping out of the door. He had already made up his mind that after a suitable interval, a month, say, he would take the risk of visiting the shop again. It was perhaps not more dangerous than shirking an evening at the Centre. The serious piece of folly had been to come back here in the first place, after buying the diary, and without knowing whether the proprietor of the shop could be trusted. However, yes, he thought again, he would come back. He would buy further scraps of beautiful rubbish. He would buy the engraving of St. Clement's Danes, take it out of its frame, and carry it home concealed under the jacket of his overalls. He would drag the rest of that poem out of Mr. Charrington's memory. Even the lunatic project of renting the room upstairs flashed momentarily through his mind again. So he's thinking about all of these things because it gives Winston a sense of freedom. He could rent the room. He could buy more things. He could get away from the party. That's what this place represents to him. He begins to be able to escape the party, even while he's still in it and forced to do everything that the party makes him do. He can find little bits of freedom in this shop. For perhaps 5 seconds, exultation made him careless, and he stepped out onto the pavement without so much as a preliminary glance through the window. He had even started humming to an improvised tune. Oranges and lemons, say the bells of St. Clement's. You owe me 3 farthings, say the... Suddenly his heart seemed to turn to ice and his bowels to water. A figure in blue overalls was coming down the pavement, not 10 meters away. It was the girl from the fiction department, the girl with dark hair. The light was failing, but there was no difficulty in recognizing her. She looked him straight in the face, then walked quickly on as though she had not seen him. So this is the girl that Winston already thinks he's paranoid that she's following him, that he sits behind her, she sits next to him, or she sits behind him, things like that. And he's convinced that she's going to turn him in. And so he's really worried about that. And we're going to find out who she is, if not in this chapter, the next chapter. For a few seconds, Winston was too paralyzed to move. Then he turned to the right and walked heavily away, not noticing for the moment that he was going in the wrong direction. At any rate, one question was settled. There was no doubting it any longer that the girl was spying on him. She must have followed him here because it was not credible that by pure chance she would have happened to be walking on the same evening up the same obscure back street, kilometers distant from any quarter where party members lived. It was too great a coincidence. Whether she was really an agent of the thought police or simply an amateur spy actuated by officiousness hardly mattered. It was enough that she was watching him. Probably she had seen him go into the pub as well. It was an extra effort to walk. The lump of glass in his pocket banged against his thigh at each step, and he was half-minded to take it out and throw it away. The worst thing was the pain in his belly. For a couple of minutes he had the feeling that he would die if he did not reach a lavatory soon, but there would be no public lavatories in a quarter like this. Then the spasm passed, leaving a dull ache behind. The street was a blind alley. Winston halted, stood for several seconds, wondering vaguely what to do, then turned round and began to retrace his steps. As he turned, it occurred to him that the girl had only passed him 3 minutes ago, and that by running he could probably catch up with her. He could keep on her track till they were in some quiet place, and then smash her skull in with a cobblestone. So he's thinking of killing this girl because he's afraid that she's going to turn him in. The piece of glass in his pocket would be heavy enough for the job, but he abandoned the idea immediately, because even the thought of making any physical effort was unbearable. He could not run, he could not strike a blow. Besides, she was young and lusty and would defend herself. He thought also of hurrying to the community center and staying there till the place closed so as to establish a partial alibi for the evening, but that too was impossible. A deadly lassitude had taken hold of him. All he wanted was to get home quickly and sit down and be quiet. So he's really afraid of her. He's really afraid of what she will do. And he's not actually going to kill her. That was just like a fleeting thing, ran through his brain. He was like, no, I can't do that. There's no way. It was after 22 hours when he got back to the flat. The lights would be switched off at the main at 23:30. He went into the kitchen and swallowed nearly a teacupful of Victory Gin. Then he went to the table in the alcove, sat down, and took the diary out of the drawer, but he did not open it at once. From the telescreen, a brassy female voice was squalling a patriotic song. So she's not singing well. Squalling is not a good description of someone singing. It means they're singing badly. He sat staring at the marbled cover of the book, trying without success to shut the voice out of his consciousness. It was a night that they came for you, always at night. The proper thing was to kill yourself before they got to you. Undoubtedly, some people did so. Many of the disappearances were actually suicides, but it needed desperate courage to kill yourself in a world where firearms or any quick and certain poison were completely unprocurable. He thought with a kind of astonishment of the biological uselessness of pain and fear, the treachery of the human body which always freezes into inertia at exactly the moment when a special effort is needed. So he's talking about the fight or flight response, where fear isn't something that's actually useful because you need to think through what you're doing and what actually needs to be done. And he's saying he doesn't have the courage to kill himself if he knows the police are coming for him. He might have silenced the dark-haired girl if only he had acted quickly enough, but precisely because of the extremity of his danger, he had lost the power to act. It struck him that in moments of crisis, one is never fighting against an external enemy, but always against one's own body. Even now, in spite of the gin, the dull ache in his belly made consecutive thoughts impossible. And it is the same, he perceived, in all seemingly heroic or tragic situations. On the battlefield, in the torture chamber, on a sinking ship, the issues that you are fighting for are always forgotten. Because the body swells up until it fills the universe, and even when you are not paralyzed by fright or screaming with pain, life is a moment-to-moment struggle against hunger or cold or sleeplessness, against a sour stomach ache or an aching tooth. So, yeah, he's talking about how life, you have to live moment to moment, and there's always pain and suffering. He opened the diary. It was important to write something down. The woman on the telescreen had started a new song. Her voice seemed to stick into his brain like jagged splinters of glass. Also, really terrible singing. The song is like jagged splinters of glass. That's like when I listen to country music. I hate country music. He tried to think of O'Brien, for whom or to whom the diary was written, but instead he began thinking of the thing that would happen to him after the thought police took him away. It would not matter if they killed you at once. To be killed was what you expected, but before death, nobody spoke of such things, yet everybody knew of them. There was the routine of confession that had to be gone through, the groveling on the floor and screaming for mercy, the crack of broken bones, the smashed teeth and bloody clots of hair. Why did you have to endure it, since the end was always the same? So Winston's saying, like, he won't just be killed by the thought police, he'll be tortured. Why was it not possible to cut a few days or weeks out of your life? Nobody ever escaped detection, and nobody ever failed to confess. When once you had succumbed to thought crime, it was certain that by a given date you would be dead. Why then did that horror, which altered nothing, have to lie embedded in the future time? So what he's saying is the end result's always the same. He's going to get killed no matter what, so what does it matter? Why do they have to torture you? He tried with a little more success than before to summon up the image of O'Brien. We shall meet in the place where there is no darkness, O'Brien had said to him. He knew what it meant, or thought he knew. The place where there is no darkness was the imagined future, which one would never see, but which by foreknowledge one could mystically share in. But with a voice from the telescreen nagging at his ears, he could not follow the train of thought further. And remember, this was a dream that O'Brien said this to him. This was not in real life. O'Brien did not say, we will meet in the place where there is no darkness in real life. Winston was asleep and dreamed that. He put a cigarette in his mouth. Half the tobacco promptly fell out onto his tongue, a bitter dust which was difficult to spit out again. So obviously this is a pretty bad cigarette. I don't smoke, but I don't think tobacco is supposed to fall out of your cigarette when you're about to smoke it. The face of Big Brother swam into his mind, displacing that of O'Brien. Just as he had done a few days earlier, he slid a coin out of his pocket and looked at it. The face gazed up at him, heavy, calm, protecting. But what kind of smile was hidden beneath the dark mustache? Like a leaden knell, the words came back at him. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. Normally, I would stop. We just got to part 2. But I want us to meet the girl from the fiction department for real, and so I'm going to read you, I guess it's like 2.5 more pages. Okay, so we're on page 93 in my book, and this is the very beginning of part 2. It was the middle of the morning, and Winston has left his cubicle to go to the lavatory, which is the bathroom. A solitary figure was coming toward him from the other end of the long, brightly lit corridor. It was the girl with dark hair, the girl from the fiction department. 4 days had gone past since the evening when he had run into her outside the junk shop. As she came nearer, he saw that her right arm was in a sling, not noticeable at a distance because it was of the same color as her overalls. Probably she had crushed her hand while swinging round one of the big kaleidoscopes on which the plots of novels were roughed in. It was a common accident in the fiction department. So here we learn that in the fiction department, people don't actually write the books, machines write the books, and she cares for the machines. And so she got hurt on one of the machines in the fiction department. They were perhaps 4 meters apart when the girl stumbled and fell almost flat on her face. A sharp cry of pain was wrung out of her. She must have fallen right on the injured arm. Winston stopped short. The girl had risen to her knees. Her face had turned a milky yellow color against which her mouth stood out redder than ever. Her eyes were fixed on his with an appealing expression that looked more like fear than pain. A curious emotion stirred in Winston's heart. In front of him was an enemy who was trying to kill him. In front of him also was a human creature, in pain and perhaps with a broken bone. Already he had instinctively started forward to help her. In the moment when he had seen her fall on the bandaged arm, it had been as though he felt the pain in his own body. "You're hurt," he said. "It's nothing. My arm. It'll be all right in a second." She spoke as though her heart were fluttering. She had certainly turned very pale. "You haven't broken anything?" "No, I'm all right. It hurt for a moment, that's all." She held out her free hand to him, and he helped her up. She had regained some of her color and appeared very much better. And so we can tell kind of how Winston's reacting to this, that this isn't a common thing to happen. Like, party members don't really talk to each other like this. They don't really help each other up. They don't really feel other people's pain. Winston felt like he could feel her arm hurt. He could feel his own arm in pain when he saw her fall and hurt her arm. "It's nothing," she repeated shortly. "I only gave my wrist a bit of a bang. Thanks, comrade." And with that she walked on in the direction in which she had been going, as briskly as though it had really been nothing. The whole instant could not have taken as much as a half-minute. Not to let one's feelings appear in one's face was a habit that had acquired the status of an instinct, and in any case they had been standing straight in front of a telescreen when the thing happened. Nevertheless, it had been very difficult not to betray a momentary surprise. For in the 2 or 3 seconds while he was helping her up, the girl had slipped something into his hand. There was no question that she had done it intentionally. It was something small and flat. As he passed through the lavatory door, he transferred it to his pocket and felt it with the tips of his fingers. It was a scrap of paper folded into a square. So that's interesting. So she slipped him a piece of paper. While he stood at the urinal, he managed, with a little more fingering, to get it unfolded. Obviously, there must be a message of some kind written on it. For a moment he was tempted to take it into one of the water closets and read it at once, but that would be shocking folly, as he well knew. So it would be a really stupid thing to do, because basically the telescreen could see him. There was no place where you could be more certain that the telescreens were watching continuously. He went back to his cubicle, sat down, threw the fragment of paper casually among the other papers on his desk, put on his spectacles, and hitched the speakwrite toward him. 5 minutes, he told himself. 5 minutes at the very least. His heart bumped in his breast with frightening loudness. Fortunately, the piece of work he was engaged on was mere routine, the rectification of a long list of figures, not needing close attention. Whatever was written on the paper, it must have some kind of political meaning. So he's thinking, like, it has something to do with government and stuff like that. He's like, I wonder what it is. So as far as he could see, there were 2 possibilities. One, much the more likely, was that the girl was an agent of the thought police, just as he had feared. He did not know why the thought police should choose to deliver their messages in such a fashion, but perhaps they had their reasons. The thing was written on the paper might be a threat, a summons, an order to commit suicide, a trap of some description. But there was another, wilder possibility that kept raising its head, though he tried vainly to suppress it. This was that the message did not come from the thought police at all, but from some kind of underground organization. Perhaps the Brotherhood existed after all. Perhaps the girl was part of it. No doubt the idea was absurd, but it had sprung into his mind in the very instant of feeling the scrap of paper in his hand. So Winston is like, either it's the thought police and they're going to kill me, or it's this underground organization that's fighting the party. It was not till a couple of minutes later that the other, more probable explanation had occurred to him, and even now, though his intellect told him that the message probably meant death, still, that was not what he believed, and the unreasonable hope persisted, and his heart banged, and it was with difficulty that he kept his voice from trembling as he murmured his fingers into the speak-right. He rolled up the completed bundle of work and slid it into the pneumatic tube. 8 minutes had gone by. He readjusted his spectacles on his nose, sighed, and drew the next batch of work toward him, with a scrap of paper on top of it. He flattened it out. On it was written, in large, unformed handwriting, "I love you." Okay, that's where we're going to stop for today. It's on page 95, where "I love you" is right there. I think it's really interesting because it was neither thing that Winston thought. It wasn't a message from the thought police. It wasn't a message from people who oppose the party. It was someone trying to have a genuine human connection with him. And it said, "I love you," which it's actually really sad because he's not used to that. He thinks it's something political. It's either he's committed a thought crime or or like someone from the underground is contacting him. He didn't even think that it could be a love message. All right, I'll see y'all next time.